The Stock Exchange. 1. The position of the stock exchange in capitalist production in general is clear from Vol.3, Part 5, especially Chapter 27. But since 1865, when this volume was written, a change has taken place which today assigns a considerably increased and constantly growing role to the stock exchange, and which, as it develops, tends to concentrate all production, industrial as well as agricultural, and all commerce, the means of communication as well as the functions of exchange, in the hands of stock exchange operators, so that the stock exchange becomes the most prominent representative of capitalist production itself. 2. In 1865, the stock exchange was still a secondary element in the capitalist system. Government bonds represented the bulk of exchange securities, and even their sum total was still relatively small. Besides, there were joint stock banks, predominant on the continent and in America, and just beginning to absorb the aristocratic private banks in England, but still relatively insignificant en masse. Railway shares were still comparatively weak compared to the present time. There were still only few directly productive establishments in stock company form, and, like the banks, most of all in the poorer countries, Germany, Austria, America, etc. The minister's eye was still an unconquered superstition. At that time, the stock exchange was still a place where the capitalists took away each other's accumulated capital, and which directly concerned the workers only as new proof of the demoralizing general effect of capitalist economy, and as confirmation of the Calvinist doctrine that predestination, alias chance, decides, even in this life, blessedness and damnation, wealth, that is enjoyment and power, and poverty, that is privation and servitude. 3. Now it is otherwise. Since the crisis of 1866, accumulation has proceeded with ever-increasing rapidity, so that in no industrial country, least of all in England, could the expansion of production keep up with that of accumulation, or the accumulation of the individual capitalist be completely utilized in the enlargement of his own business. English cotton industry as early as 1845. The railway swindles. But with this accumulation, the number of rentiers, people who were fed up with the regular tension in business and therefore wanted merely to amuse themselves or to follow a mild pursuit as directors or governors of companies, also rose. And third, in order to facilitate the investment of this mass floating around as money capital, new legal forms of limited liability companies were established, wherever that had not yet been done, and the liability of the shareholder, formerly unlimited, was also reduced, more or less. Joint stock companies in Germany, 1890, 40% of subscription. 4. Thereafter, gradual conversion of industry into stock companies. One branch after another suffers this fate. First, iron, where giant plants are now necessary. Before that, mines, where not already organized on shares. Then the chemical industry. Likewise, machinery plants. On the continent, the textile industry. In England, only in a few areas in Lancashire, Oldham spinning mill, Burnley weaving mill, etc. Tailor cooperatives. But this is only a preliminary stage, which will again fall into the master's hands at the next crisis. Breweries. The American ones sold a few years ago to English Kapital, then Guinness, Bass, Allsop. Then the trusts, which create gigantic enterprises under common management, such as United Alkali. The ordinary individual firm is more and more only a preliminary stage to bring the business to the point where it is big enough to be founded. Likewise in trade, Leafs, Parsons, Morley's, Morrison, Dillon, all founded. The same in retail stores by now, and not merely under the cloak of cooperation a la cooperative wholesale society. Likewise banks and other credit establishments, even in England. A tremendous number of new banks, all shares delimited. Even old banks, etc., are converted, with 7 private shareholders, into limited companies. 5. The same in the field of agriculture. The enormously expanded banks, especially in Germany, under all sorts of bureaucratic names, more and more the holders of mortgages. With their shares, the actual higher ownership of landed property is transferred to the stock exchange, and this is even more true when the farms fall into the creditors' hands. Here, the agricultural revolution of prairie cultivation is very impressive. If it continues, the time can be foreseen when England's and France's land will also be in the hands of the stock exchange. 6. Now all foreign investments in the form of shares. To mention England alone, American railways, North and South, consult the stock exchange list, Goldberger, etc. 7. Then colonization. Today this is purely a subsidiary of the stock exchange, in whose interests the European powers divided Africa a few years ago, and the French conquered Tunis and Tonkin. Africa leased directly to companies, Niger, South Africa, German Southwest and German East Africa, and Mashonaland and Natal seized by Rhodes for the stock exchange.